travelers, and welcome to The Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and your guide along the way. And viewing the world through the lens of showmanship, it just means taking showmanship and performance totally serious. And this is the only thing that I really know well in my life, how to perform. It's what I've been doing for my whole life. And I'm using this concept that by knowing one thing, you can then recognize stuff that you actually know that you know work and has positive impact on your life and on your work and on who you are. And taking this one idea that I understand well and applying it to everything else. So today, because I am recording this in a crack of my time when I am in a small town still, and I will be for all of December in these episodes. So also for this episode here, that is an interim episode. It is an extra bonus added because it's almost Christmas, and it turns out the next episode, the regularly scheduled episode, will be out on Christmas Eve, which is the day that you open the presents here in Norway. So I hope a lot of you tune in. And if you haven't done already, please click subscribe. It's my what I really want for Christmas. So all I want from Christmas is your subscription. It's free. You just click. The episode comes down for free in your podcast inbox. Why don't do that as a special Christmas bonus present for me? It would be awesome. Anyway, I'm going to keep this as brief as I can because I am aware that the microphone that I'm using here, because I didn't bring my normal microphone. Please enjoy my conversation with Jay Gilligan, where we explore the possible and the actual, and this is based on some of the ideas that Jay have picked out as seeds for conversation from our showmanship and play episode exploration, which was in episode 109. I hope you enjoy this added bonus extra.
Hey man, how's it going? I haven't talked to you in a while, man. You doing good?
It's been ages. I am doing really good. It's really good.
Last time I got to talk to you, you were going to hang up that Mad Apple poster. Did you ever get around to doing that?
Yes, I did. I'll post.
Yeah, it looks great. Oh yeah. I see it. Yeah. I see it there behind you. It's got all the signatures on it of all the cast members.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was a big deal to be in Mad Apple. I was so excited to work with Cirque, and it was. Never thought that it wasn't even on my radar. I didn't think it would be possible. And all of a sudden I was there, and I am going back twice next year.
What was crazy is, of course, I got to come see you there. And in all honesty, I don't know what better act they could have gotten for the show Mad Apple when they thought of the show Mad Apple. I think but seriously, I think somehow your tennis racket act, is the cross section of everything they wanted the show to ever be, I guess. I don't know. It was just really perfect, I thought.
I did feel that, and it was one of the comments that I got both from fellow artists and from management, and also from techs as well that I was hanging out with, that the act fitted the show really well. Yeah. Its tagline is not your usual Cirque show. And this is Cirque comedy music mayhem. And
exactly.
And I am offering mayhem, and I'm it fitted all those kind of things. It's a little bit crazy, but so I was really happy at how well it went. And
this is this is a whole other episode at some point, but now the Cirque du Soleil show Song Blazers just closed after 4 months, less than 100 performances, and of course the show Run closed before the pandemic, also around 3 or 4 months, I think. Long. So the fact that Mad Apple, and again, we don't even have to get into the idea of the show or the concept or the title or the quality of the show. We're just talking about the market now. So the fact that, Mad Apple opened and that it's still running and still selling tickets and you're going to go back, that's also kind of a minor miracle, in light of the other new Cirque offerings, just to say. That's also amazing. I don't know.
It is amazing. It really is. things got turbulent in Vegas as well. I mean, I ended up in Norway, and the pandemic is still playing out. And I mean, I'm sure that with Run and with other shows, there's always a million reasons why something doesn't work out or whatever. And when you're going really bold, like they did with Run, where there was like all these video elements and stuff, and or whatever, like you're trying to put together a few things, and then you're seeing if the metaphor sticks, to go with the language that we were developing in the last episode, like the movie language. And Robert Rodriguez was involved in Run, the movie director, and somehow then after 4 months they decided that the metaphor didn't work. The components that they'd put together didn't read as a cohesive story to the general public. Or I mean, I don't know any of the details of why it closed, but I was just trying to tie it into what we talked about last time.
Oh, no, it's perfect, because today we're going to talk about episode 109. Yeah. And actually, thinking about Cirque du Soleil Song Blazers, where it's like, hey, we want to take country music and tie that into a Cirque du Soleil style show. It's kind of the perfect segue into the first quote that I pulled from the episode here.
Awesome. Well, just fire at will. Then we have a tendency to just go on for ages without starting.
But that was it's a nice little context. So keep in mind country music and Cirque du Soleil. Yeah. And now here's the first transcript from the episode. So you were talking about soccer, football, and you said the sport and the constraints creates the actuals out of the possibles. Yeah. So there we go. The actuals, which is like country music, and the possibles is like country music or video projection for Run, and then Cirque du Soleil. That's all the possible things, and the actuals are Run and Song Blazers. Yeah. R.I.P. So the quote keeps saying, like anything could be possible at any given time, but if you don't actually restrict yourself to taking a certain amount of choices, then it just remains possible. Everything is always possible. And I study this, I could do that, I could go out and you said kick the neighbor's dog, which is hilarious. But it's also fun because like, it is true. When we think about, all these things are possible, it also is good to point out that some of those things could be bad. Like you could do bad things, maybe not on purpose. I mean, the kick the neighbor's dog is an extreme example of that, but like it's worth pointing out that like everything is possible, including maybe things that are unintentionally destructive or whatever. And like you go on to say, you said, I could do many things, but I won't do them. So then you can also consciously know that you're going to try not to do bad things. But then you said only when they become actual, it becomes real, and there's a whole lot more possible things than there are actual things. And so that's the whole little quote there I wanted to pull out. And again, I had a couple of reflections, and then I wanted to throw it over to you. But this idea that all these things are possible, and then there's the things that are actual things. And there's a whole lot more things that are possible than there are things that are actually happening. So in one way, I also wrestle with this idea in my mind. And I don't want to turn this into playing with language. I don't think that's the point here. I don't want to play with words and definitions of words. But I used to think that, I don't know, this is going to be a bad example, but it comes to my mind right now. Kurt Cobain and the band Nirvana, right? So Kurt Cobain tragically shot himself. But Kurt Cobain was also championed at the time as this kind of genius of music and genius artist and this new, style of music and a voice of a generation and a brilliant writer and all these things. And maybe he was, but this idea of a genius to me, well, I'm bringing in a bunch of little layers here, but this idea of genius to me, I used to think it was about the work. I used to think it only rested on the work, but thinking about Kurt Cobain and some other people I've known over the years who have struggled with, let's say, mental health, but you could also just say they've struggled with, life. I mean, it doesn't have to be about mental health. It can just be like man, I need to make that car payment, or I need to whatever, that, you know, people struggle, like we all struggle every day with just like small things. It doesn't have to be so dramatic or big, is what I mean. And this idea of genius maybe is somebody who can navigate all those things and still put on a decent show. You know what I mean? Like, I'll go see a show these days, and because, again, you know, you're a father, I'm a father, we have families, we have other obligations other than our work, our performing work. I'll go see a show these days, and even if it's like a quote unquote mediocre show, sometimes I'll just be in complete awe of that show, because I'll be like, this person got out of bed, they got clean, they put clothes on, they got in the car, they drove to the gig, they set everything up. Like, I understand now, because I'm an adult and I'm older and I know how the world works more deeply, and I know everything involved in making a show, that it's not just about that time on stage, it's about everything else. They booked the gig, they sent the emails, they talked on the phone, they said the right things, they got their show in that market, on that stage, in front of that audience. There's some sort of genius to that.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of like, everything is possible, but there's only the things that are actual things that actually happen. And so this idea of genius, this idea that it's the peak artistic output, I don't know if that's so genius, and this isn't in any relationship to Kurt Cobain shooting himself, but the point being that, like, where does sustainability fit into the idea of genius?
Yeah.
So it's like, we can make the peak work, but if it's going to literally kill us, or because we also have that romantic cultural idea of that the artist has to suffer, right, in order to make genius work. Like, we still have that on our back, as like the artist somehow has to be in a tragedy so that they can produce the peak work. And normally with our pop stars, we much prefer when they're single and miserable, because then they write the great pop album about that breakup, as opposed to when they're married with kids and they've become, you know, domesticated, and they don't do the wild parties anymore. There is some sort of degree of suffering that we kind of imply when we talk about genius work. Anyway, my point just being that, like, I think these days, I think a lot about genius work is also, one aspect is sustainability, and that it doesn't burn you out, it doesn't kill you, so that you can just keep making work. So maybe the work is like 5% less than the craziest work you could ever think of, but at the same time, you're going to keep writing those albums, you're going to keep doing those shows, because the show you did doesn't kill you.
Yeah.
And so this idea about like everything is possible, there's a weird play on words there, because that's what I'm trying to say here. It's a long way around to say it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not actually possible. Like, we think there's the potential that it's possible. Like, we imagine it's possible, but in reality, if it did become actual, maybe it would kill you, or it would burn you out, or it would, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it's this weird illusion we have many times, where we in our minds, we're like, oh man, we could do all these things here right now. But I think that's a little bit of an illusion, because it's not, those things aren't actually possible maybe in the long run. And of course some of them are, but what I'm trying to say is we can temper our, what do you say sometimes, Frodo? You call it like blue sky thinking or something, where you just kind of imagine like all the possibilities that are just free. And I think a lot of the possibilities that we kind of daydream about are way less realistic than we maybe realize until they are in the real world.
Yeah.
At least I find that in my own life a lot. So how do you think about this difference between like everything is possible, but then in reality, I mean, there are a little bit more constraints than just kind of anything goes, right? I mean,
yeah. I think I really like this idea of having the genius. What does that mean? And to me, the idea of genius, or the idea of, it's like the idea of, that I say, first and foremost, it's a showman I am. That has been the thing that has gone through my entire life. And if you put as like, if you want to be that, the genius act of being, if that's who I am, and to continue to do it, that if I now have to go and sit in the check out at the grocery store instead to pay the bills, then I am somehow not being myself. Because now that I'm almost 50 years old, not quite, a few years old, but that this is who I am, and this is what, like we spoke about in the last episode, that I feel, this is where I feel right, and this is my desire and my drive to play and all these things. If I go and do something else, I have in some sense failed at being true to myself.
Right.
And the genius acts that I need to perform or to create is to be able to keep me in that space, is to keep me actual as a showman. And I think there's something in there in that, but just keeping you, so when I'm thinking of genius, I'm also thinking just of showman or being true to yourself. And when I wrote it down here, I just put a bunch of lines pointing out from the letter G, which is genius, which reminds me that that's the symbol that the Freemasons use for God, or the grand architect of the entire universe, the supreme being. So now I'm totally rambling, but I think that sustainability, to allow you or afford you to be able to pursue this path of where you are driven by your own inner motivation, following aspect 3, where you are having fun, so being true to yourself. So this is an act of genius, and the act of genius is less so if you kill yourself during it, or if this thing actually exacerbates you or brings on aspects of mental illness.
Yeah, potentially. So, just to interject really quickly, I remember another quote from Eddie Vedder, who's the lead singer of Pearl Jam, and back at the height of their trajectory to skyrocketing to fame in the early 1990s, he went on MTV and he said, "I thought of the best ending for our concert. It would be that I would rip off my limbs, but I could only do 3 concerts because I would rip off one arm, and then the next show I'd rip off a leg, and I could rip off the other leg, but I couldn't rip off my final arm with my own arm." Yeah. And I just thought that was such a funny, stupid, and also it stuck in my mind because in one way that would be the most sensational way to end that concert, right? Again, this is a really dumb example, but like, you can think of these great things you could do. Oh man, all these things are possible, Frodo. And you could imagine you're at that concert when Eddie Vedder rips off his arm. Like, it would be the craziest show ever. But at the same time, yeah, it's not sustainable. And like, so what that points out to me is we can go out in a blaze of glory. We can try to rip off our 4 limbs, and maybe that is our legend or something. But more practically, what it means to me is, what is our true goal? Because we have that romantic idea in our mind of what it is to be an artist and what it does mean to have success in our work and whatever. But for me, there is then a different level of actual reality, not only on the possibilities of what we're going to do, but the results of what we do. And this idea of what it means to have success, it really struck me. It really stuck in my brain of like, oh, maybe the point isn't to just, like Eddie Vedder was pointing there unintentionally towards like a different trajectory in life, and like a different goal besides just like the peak sensational moment of craziness, right?
I think you do that, you get it, and it could reflect again on many things, but let's go back to Kurt Cobain. And part of what exacerbated his situation was that he already had a troubled relationship to himself with mental illness, and there was drugs involved too, substantial amounts of drugs. And there's almost like, if you're just going for the peak experience for your audience, but just narrowing it down to just him as a genius creator, that you go, I'm writing these stories on the back of napkins on the thing, and then I know these poems, and then I put it to music, and then it's the greatest thing, and the world agrees it's the greatest thing ever. And now you're peaking from the creation of all of that, but then after a while, somehow just performing Smells Like Teen Spirits does not do that for you anymore, because you're there every time it's performed and you're struggling to make it real. So to increase the peak experience of that, you start taking drugs. So now I'm having the experience of being on some euphoric high or some chilled heroin, whatever it is that, and you're adding that to your experience, and you're now having this deep emotional biological connection to the music again that is different from what you had before. But along the way, you are, in a sense, like Eddie Vedder said, you're sort of cutting off your arm because those other things are grasping onto you, or like, and pulling you apart. And what exactly it was that made it tip over? Was it the drugs? Was it the fame? Was it the not being able to go out anymore? Was it whatever it is? Or it all plays its role, because you can probably write a book about the effects of drug use on Kurt Cobain, or the effect and trajectory of his writing as a poet and musician, or his relationship to Courtney Love, or his relationship to the other people in the band, or all these things. So, and each of those things will have and be true. The story that's told from those points of view will be true, but everything is going on at the same time for him. So we're back at that concept where he's in the middle, and his relationship to drugs, his relationship to Nirvana, the band, his relationship to his own development as a human being, and his relationship to himself as an artist, all of those, he is all of those things. But to David Grohl, he is one relationship, and he is a one relationship to these others, but in himself he is all those things. And there again we are at this thing, he is to himself way more actualizations than he is for the individuals or the aspects around him also. So well, and he is constantly then actualizing himself through every relationship that he has with everything, with his own mind, with drugs, with rock and roll, and all of that. So it keeps coming back to this really interesting concept of like, it's, you could always do everything, but you can always just do one thing. So you're sorry.
Well, no, but to take this in a more show business tact, or like in a world that I know about, because I don't do I'm not a grunge rock star, so I'm
not yet, but it's possible.
It is possible. That's perfect, Frodo. Yeah, thanks for wrapping this up into something like useful. Is it possible though? That's my whole point. So like,
it's possible in the way that me going out and kicking the neighbor's dog.
Oh man. Okay, so in terms of my personal experience with creating shows and creating performances, I think a large part of my I don't say identity, but maybe it's something like that, or my process or something, is I have like a scrappiness to me. And I think that ideas are possible on many different levels. I just wanted to point that out. So you can have a concept, and maybe the concept initially is we should have 20 elephants on stage and they should all be painted gold. And I'm such a firm believer of there's a version of that idea that I can actually do. So, and I often joke in rehearsal, I think I've done it with you when we've been in rehearsal together, where it's like, well, in the Cirque du Soleil version of this prop will come up out of the floor. Or, in the Cirque du Soleil version of this, there'll be 20 people who descend from the ceiling carrying candles that will drip the wax onto the blah, 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 whatever. But this idea that we can scale ideas. And I think that's a talent, or I don't know if it's a talent, but it's a skill that you can hone. And I just want to point that out, that this idea that normally when we're first thinking of ideas and we're becoming artists and we're exploring our ideas or whatever, you're kind of often stuck with your first thought. You go, oh man, we should get a bicycle in here or whatever. And then you maybe even go out and you get a bicycle, or you buy one, or you bring it into the studio, and then you maybe even make the trick And then you have to realize, oh, but we have to fly with this show and we can't carry the bicycle or whatever, right? Like a little example here. Whereas I think now what I try to do in my artistic life is I try to work through the mental process of looking into the future as much as I can to save myself as much money, time, and effort. And that comes back to that being scrappy in terms of like trying to conserve my resources because I don't have a lot of time or money or energy. And it just reminds me, I was in a show in Finland probably over 20 years ago. And the rehearsal process, to my mind, was quite long. It was 4 months long, which for the scale and scope of the show, I thought was really a long time to rehearse, 4 months. And the first 2 months, they were working with some sort of, it was like a collaboration with a puppet theater. And these puppet theater craftsmen were making amazing puppets. They did like human-sized eyeballs and noses and lips, and every day you'd come into rehearsal and they'd have a new costume to wear, and we tried to make a fragmented face. There'd be a big human-sized ear costume that you'd put on and dance around like a big ear. And guess what? Not a single one of those props made it into the final show 4 months later. And they're all sitting in a storage room somewhere in Helsinki as we speak. And that really burned into my brain, 25 years ago, of this idea of like, oh, it's maybe not just if you have the resources, even if you have the money for that, you have the money to pay those people and to buy those materials, you have the talent and you have the time to explore those ideas. You want to be a lot more thoughtful, or you could be a lot more thoughtful with your process towards, streamlining your resources and conserving your money and your energy and your time. And so this idea of like everything is possible is true. But I just wanted to put it out there and say that ideas can scale up and down. That's one point. And the second point being that, like, of course, there's a utility in making things actually real and having them be concretely in front of you. And maybe making that ear costume led to the final version of the show. And you could say, well, it's all part of the process. But personally, at least in my life, at the scale of where I'm working, I don't have that luxury of going through the process of making the ear costume and then just like putting it in the closet and then saying, well, it led me to the final version of the show, so it was all worth it. My point being that oftentimes I try to work through a few steps ahead mentally of making something actually real before I go ahead and make it actually real, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. This makes total sense to me. And it is because I think you and me have a similar idea of what kind of work needs to be done before we go into the rehearsal space to do it. And we can just go to Reflex, which is a good example because everyone who listens to this can go back and listen to previous episodes where we explore this in our process for that in depth. And both you and me like to, when we arrive, to have a script and a plan. We want to hold that script and that plan. And we know when even in the last instance, when I flew to Sweden and we worked together to make it happen, even then we held the ideas loose and cut whole bits after that and whole chunks of it and stories. And we redefined the beginning of the Viagra story that never made it into it. We worked on that so much. But what we actually worked on was how you were to deliver text. That was the valuable thing that came out of it, even though the text and the thing that we actually spoke about, you being part of the launch of this miracle drug, that never made into it. But that wasn't the part of what we rehearsed or what we were doing in that process. What we were actually doing was preparing you to do the text that you decided on, that we decided on doing instead later on. So that's that thing of going, we're working on it, and we are working on what we at that time thought was the actual thing. But what we were working on was a possibility to create a tool that could be many things. Because now, once we had cracked that way of you telling a story at the beginning of your show, what you were going to, we had done so much work on that, and it felt like it was going really slowly. but it was because we were breaking ground into a mode of presentation for you, which was different. And then once we had cracked that, all of a sudden, all kinds of new things became possible. All of a sudden, all of these other texts, and we're going, okay, we got to dig down on the NASA material, because that's where the end of the thing is. And it became clear, and you made those changes, and we talked about all the different possibles. And yeah, so I think that's really cool. And this sort of scrappiness, I also have that often, where you sort of go, and it's using the criteria of play, criteria 4, it's got to have rules. And the rules is, we're going to go on a plane with this show. So
right.
We have this, that's one of the rules that I set, or whatever, that you mentioned, using that language. And it's going, it's fun to do this with a bike or whatever. But then, okay, well, if we are to use a bike, then we need to, if we've really decided that idea is strong enough, then we need
Right.
to make it so that it can, I need to practice the skills so that it can happen with a generic bike.
Right.
Because to actualize a bike when you went to New York City, for instance, with Reflex, would be possible.
Yeah.
It's within the realm of possible. You could borrow one, but if there was a very specific bike, then
Right.
that needed to be, that costed all the practicalities of actualizing that. So I kind of think also to tie it back to it's like we're talking about the possible and the actual. The possible is the infinite possibilities, and the actual is what actually happens. And what I am proposing is that play is the process which we go through to actualize something. Because if you just go concretely and you go, it's going to be this, it's going to be that, then we get to what I called in the last episode, painting by numbers. But it's the playful process. It's holding everything loosely. Okay, we need a bike. Okay, do we need it? Or like the elephants, the 20 elephants, do they really need to be painted gold? Because then we need body paint in 44-gallon drums.
Right.
Like, okay, so can we make a suit that they wear? Can we, like, cause, or like you got to think simpler, or think so. And I think that's great. And it also, that goes on to this thing that you and me have talked about off mic, about the relationship of taking time into this as well. The ongoing thing is that if it's a show that has legs to walk on and it gets a future, then it will continue to go on, and maybe the scope or the ideas will refine, and you will be even better at the skills, and you will see dimensions that you didn't see before, just by the nature that it goes on. So that's the other sort of thing. It's to go, maybe the gold paint of the elephant or the bicycle will come in later, when you realize, oh no, actually this thing is so crucial that to pay the extra money is going to be worth it. And that comes through the development in time as well, to continue to play with the idea. Yeah.
I noticed that in our conversations, I often like to push things to the realm of thinking. I'm always kind of like, yeah, but if you just think a little bit more, like kind of always encouraging this process of putting things in your mind a little bit more than an actual reality for some reason. And I wonder, I don't know how to resolve. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do notice my tendency towards that. And I just had a couple of examples I wanted to run by you, and we don't need to answer it, but I think it's really relevant here. One is I don't know if I ever told you my kind of infamous story of being hired by the Seven Fingers. I was standing on a volcano. I was literally standing on the edge of a volcano crater in Iceland when I got a phone call from Gypsy Snyder, and she asked me if because I was working with a juggler named Manu Lod at the time, and she said if the two of us could come juggle, and they were going to do the show Loft in Berlin for 1 year.
Love that.
And so it turned out that Manu was actually, and to be clear, me and Manu, we had an act together that she had seen. And it turned out that Manu wasn't available for that year, but I didn't want to lose the gig. So I called Gypsy back when I was in Iceland, and I said, oh, but I have an act with this other guy named Matthias Salmonejo. And she said, oh, great. Yeah, well, that sounds cool. Like, let's go with that. And the truth of the matter is we didn't have an act. But the whole rehearsal thing was late, and it was a panic. It was a last minute phone call. So the next day I was on an airplane to Montreal, and Matthias was on an airplane, and I was in Iceland, and he was in Finland going to Montreal, and we didn't have an act. And so I really remember distinctly, it was a big moment in my life of sitting on the airplane from Iceland to Montreal with a notebook. And I wrote an act in my mind for me and Matthias. And it was really fun because not only did I have to imagine the juggling that could be like I made like original juggling in my brain without actually doing it, but we had to do it first try because when we landed, she wanted to see the act. Like that was how we were going to start. Like, okay, you guys come to Montreal, we'll see the act, and then we'll put you guys into the show. It was all very hurried and rushed and whatever. And so not only am I designing juggling in my head, but I'm designing juggling that like you basically have to be able to do the first time you try it, which again was somebody who you've never worked with before, and juggling is pretty much impossible. And so I remember we landed in Montreal in the morning, and then Gypsy had said, okay, so can we see your act? And it was like an hour before lunchtime. And I said, oh, we're pretty jet lagged, maybe it's better that we take the lunch break and we get warmed up and we don't want to get injured and blah, 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 professional sounding whatever. And then during the lunch break, me and Matthias snuck off for an hour and learned the act from my notebook. And then we did the act in the afternoon and they're like, oh yeah, it looks great. Let's do it like this. And it was just, and then we got the contract and then we did the year in Berlin with that show. But I never forgot that moment and since I did that airplane trip, I love that I have that skill of imagining juggling in my head, which I didn't have before. I didn't think that was a valid process because juggling is a physical activity, but I've really benefited from it a lot. Like if I'm in rehearsal with Eric these days, making a new show with Eric Aubery, and then maybe we'll have a discussion and say, oh, maybe we could juggle like this. And then I can just look in my brain and go like, oh, I don't know if that juggling is going to work like that. I can save ourselves a little bit of time and effort, right? Because I can edit in my brain like that. But on the contrary, I have a different example from Eric, which I think is also really, really, I don't know, informative or somehow. So there's the artist Theo Janssen. And Theo, he makes these sculptures called strand beasts out of PVC pipe on the beaches in the Netherlands. And then the wind blows them and they walk across the beach. And the way that Theo Janssen started off that project was he wrote a computer program, and I'm going to get the date wrong, but it was like 1982 or something. And the computer program did a simulated version of evolution. So it made iterations of leg joints, and over the process of it's a computer, so they sped up evolution, and over thousands of generations, it came up with a prototype of a leg that has 12 different lengths of pipe on it, and then that leg walks across the beach using this golden ratio of these 12 parts. And of course, you could iterate yourself just in a workshop. But imagine you have 12 different lengths of pipe that each pipe has to be specifically long or the leg won't walk. You could spend your whole life trying to make those measurements, right? But so the computer did this fake evolution of simulated evolution, and it found this leg joint that actually worked. And that's what Theo has used for his whole life to make these creatures who walk on the beach. So Eric has been making these ghost cube creations, these wooden boxes that turn and twist and fold on each other. He calls them ghost cubes. And at one point I said, because they're physical sculptures, they started to take up space in our studio, right? So like he would build these ghost cubes and they started to pile up, and like soon you couldn't really open the door to the storage space because there were just these ghost cubes everywhere. I mean, they take up volumetric space. They're three-dimensional cubes, right? So they just become big. And so at one point I said to Eric, I was like, hey man, you should do like Theo Janssen. You should make a computer program where you code into the program the DNA of these ghost cubes, and then you just press the button and it does like the simulated evolution of life, and it just does all the permutations for you. And then you can just pick and choose which permutations you want to build, and then it will stop this problem we have of scarcity of space in our studio. But Eric's response was amazing. And he just said, no, that's the opposite of the process that I have and that I want to have. He said, my process is I do the next evolution. You know, he makes a generation of this ghost cube, this certain shape, and then he looks at it and he holds it and he studies it and he moves it with his body, with his hands, and he looks at it from different angles and he sits with it and it's on the table, right? And he thinks about it. And then he makes the next version and he said, I have to make each version physically to know what I'm going to do next. And so I think that's also a really amazing and valid approach. So we have the two opposites, right? It's like me sitting on an airplane, just imagining in my brain some juggling. And then we have the exact opposite approach, which is like, no, I double down on, I have to make every single version physically possible so that I touch it with my hands. And it's the touching it with my hands which makes the next version possible. So I don't know. There's a few little thoughts there.
Yeah. That's great. And I think there's a powerful thing to be said for that. Making is thinking as well. Like it's the same. We think that thinking is just related to our brain, but that goes all the way back to Descartes going, I think, therefore I am. But it's not. The feeling goes deeper than thinking in evolution. So I feel, therefore I am is also true. I think, therefore I am. That's true. But I feel. But it's also I do, therefore I am. When I do or when I make something, actually, then I am actualizing ideas and feelings and whatever. So each one of those are also sort of true. And making something is thinking with your hands. You're now in a dialogue like you and me are. You're in a dialogue with what you, like the picture that you just painted of Eric, making it, gluing it, sanding it, making all those things. Then he sits with a real object. And now as he encounters something which is actual, something that he has created and he's put it in, he explores all the different things that he can do. And the knowledge that he gets through this interaction is invaluable to where this goes. Because the brute force way of a computer playing chess is to go through all the millions of possibilities. You include me kicking the dog and you starting becoming a grunge thing, because they are possible. So you go through it, but now you need to go through a million things. But a grandmaster of chess skips past the vast majority, infinite amounts he does not even consider. Or she, when she's sitting there and she's about to make the next move, without thinking, she's down to 5 options or something.
Right.
And part of the skill is the restrictions. Don't go down that lane. Don't go down that other lane. That's also why sometimes when the computer does something or AI or whatever, we enter into a space where we go, holy shit, we just learned something new about what chess could be or whatever because of this thing. So they have gone into the adjacent possible, into these are possibilities that we never looked into because you needed to do 11 other permutations, and then you get into a different realm. So it's sorry, you got some idea?
That just reminds me of Ivar Heckscher. Ivar Heckscher, he's not an actual practicing juggler. He cannot juggle, but I call him a juggler because he knows juggling intimately and he's known it for 20 years now. But because he has the lack of the physical practice of it, he says stuff that isn't possible. Like he says stuff he shouldn't say. It's what you're just saying about the computer. He's not restricted by reality. He's not restricted by that actual manual dexterity, that physical feedback, because he's never had it before. So he'll just say stuff. And often when Ivar says something about juggling, my first reaction is, honestly, it's like, that's a stupid idea, or like more precisely, like, that's impossible. But then if I sit down and think about it for 2 seconds, I go, but why not? Why shouldn't that be possible? And again, to scale the idea, how can that be possible? Because he's right in the bigger picture. He just has no experience on the practical level, but that shouldn't stop us from trying to make those things happen. And that is the genius of Ivar, and that is our collaboration over these 20, 25 years. And that's why all these things have happened with him, because we have that nice little interplay between us. He's always being very conceptual, or not even conceptual. In his mind, he's being very straightforward. But the things he says are so out of touch with the actual technical practice that what he's saying is generally impossible, but it's in solving or resolving that impossibility which makes the creation happen, which is so wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, that's why interdisciplinary collaborations can be really powerful, because they and to concretize that, it's you and me. You're always talking from the point of view of the juggler and all that, and we have so many overlapping ideas, but it is the slightly different language and a slightly different experience of working within different mediums that has had us exploring this idea of concrete and abstract for so long. And we have made some recent breakthroughs in that, which we got to do an episode about that as well.
Yeah.
But like the discord, or the bits where we don't fit quite together, or where we don't even quite know, we both know what it is that we're talking about, but we can't put it into words.
Right.
And in a sense, that is what poetry is about. It's that the poetry is this new experience, this new, and it's not explaining that thing, it is that, so that when you read the poem, you get a new feeling, or you get a new, the juxtaposition of words and everything inside it becomes this new thing. So that's what the language that we're developing in trying to, why you and me sometimes go absolutely mental doing our voice messages back and forth on WhatsApp, and then it's like, oh yeah, that's it, and you just have my mind blown on a redefinition of something, on something.
Yeah.
We've called it abstract and concrete, and that did not cover it, but it did at the time. But we were exploring, and recently we've sort of made some leaps forward into what it was that we were talking about, and it includes more or less or whatever, and we're defining the language and understanding then more aspects of actual reality.
Well, so the other quotes I have from this episode, they're all in the same vein. I mean, it's all from the same episode here. But there was a couple of highlights I really wanted to point out here, because the next one is one of my favorite things so far in the whole series on play, actually. And it's, again, literally in the flow of our thoughts right now, because it's all the same thing, but it's all connected. But the quote is this. I'll read the quote and I'll tell you why I love it. It says, because there are restrictions everywhere, from time, space, and gravity, there's already restrictions. The world, life, humans, the things we create, and the activities that we engage in, they're shaped by these things. Like things like time and gravity is, of course, so fundamental, we don't even think of them as restrictions. But it is a restriction that I can't fly. And then I'll just finish up a little bit more. It's so fun. But I mentioned gravity and time to point out there's restrictions to the world, or the restrictions that exist. They go all the way down to the very fundamentals. And they're the part of what makes the world the way it is. From gravity to our particular desires, or our social intelligence, and what stands between us creating a new act and not creating it. It all comes down to the restrictions. And what I love that you did here is two things. It's so cool and it's so crazy. And the first thing is that, yeah, I just have to talk from my perspective as a juggler, right? I can't do anything else.
It's what we want.
So, Eric always says we've been going from we're in the age of consciousness in juggling. We went from intuitive thinking, which is when me and Eric grew up, when we learned how to juggle, and now juggling is starting to evolve into some sort of age of consciousness that wasn't there before. And as part of that evolution from intuitiveness to consciousness, we have questioned the fundamentals of what it means to juggle. We have questioned the fundamentals of the definition of the word, and that's not creating a new definition. That's only trying to understand what people mean between each other when they use the word juggling, because that exists, and that's just something to try to comprehend. That's been a big work of Eric's, the first 3 episodes of our podcast, Object Episodes. So what is juggling? That's the first thing we started to, when I first learned how to juggle, I didn't think about what is juggling. I didn't think about it. I just did it. And so now we're questioning fundamentally, what is it that we're doing? And then the other things that was so useful to tear apart was, what is a drop, what is a throw, and what is a catch? The three most fundamental things of what is juggling. And so to question those techniques or those occurrences or those events or whatever you want to call it has been one of the most useful things that I've done. And so I love that you drill it back even farther. Like it's so fun. Time, space, and gravity. Like it's so cool. I love it that you're getting down to the heart of where are we starting, because we do take so many things for granted and we assume so many things. And that's the second part I just want to point out, that you say the world we live in is shaped by these things. And so, of course, there's a balance to be found here between because we are limited in our time and resources, right? So we can't sit down and say, okay, Frodo, so we're going to make a new act together. We have to remember, Frodo, that the audience will be breathing. We have to remember that their hearts will be beating. Like, we probably don't have enough time to delve into that aspect of the performance, I'm guessing. But at the same time, I think we can still take this idea that there's time, space, and gravity. To me, it's symbolic that we can always drill down to another level of fundamental knowledge and understanding about what we're trying to do and where we're trying to go. And I always think about that. Who is the audience? What do they want? What do you want to show them? What are we doing here? Where is here? What is a show? I mean, you can take all of these words and the definition of those words and drill them down to one more level below of like concrete, building block foundational knowledge of like, what is a show? And we've seen so many people play with that. You get Sleep No More, Punch Drunk in New York City, which is immersive, this whole trend in the past few years of immersive theater. But like, what is it happening? And studying performance art, driving a car in Spain into a crowd of people, and Archaeos back in the 80s, Archaeos Circus, and kind of twisting the genre. And so I've always found it to be really useful to re-examine what we think we know and examine the definitions of what we think is a show, what is an act, what is a character, what is a costume. And and in one way it sounds kind of silly or trivial. Well, of course we know what a costume is, but it's like, it goes back to, I have so many, I could talk about this forever, but like all those stories about like Sean McKinney, 1991, he shows up to the competition. He's wearing a white t-shirt and ripped up blue jeans, and he's got a garment bag with him because the year before he wore ripped up blue jeans and a white t-shirt, and the judges disqualified him because they said he didn't have a costume, because the judges were a bunch of old people like we are now, Frodo. And they said, well, that's not a costume. A costume is, sequins and a vest and a suit jacket and a bow tie, right? So Sean shows up the next year. He's wearing ripped up blue jeans and a white t-shirt and a garment bag. And out of the garment bag, he unzips it, and there's a pair of ripped up blue jeans and a white t-shirt, and he changes out of the ripped up blue jeans into the other ripped up blue jeans, and he changes the white t-shirt into the other white t-shirt. And he says, this is my costume because I'm expressing who I am, and my clothes express what I want to give, the experience I want to give to the audience. And that you don't recognize this as a traditional costume in your eyes, it doesn't mean it's not a costume. And it was so punk rock that he showed up with the garment back. And that's questioning.
It's conceptual, but it is also really practical, and it's fighting with someone who tells you that you have to wear a bow tie and smile when you juggle, because Professor Confidence said so.
It's questioning the foundational fabric of the universe. It's like, what is a costume? What does that actually mean? Is it literally a bow tie, or is it something that expresses an aspect of the performance that you want to transmit to the audience, which it obviously is, right? Mm. And so, this idea that like we always assume we know what we're doing to a certain level. You have to get through life, or we'll just be hung up on every step of the way. At the same time, Anyway,
Yeah. This is the
that
possible.
we think we know what the world is. Yeah.
He opens up a door to the adjacent possible, as Stuart Kaufman calls it. The adjacent possible. This to the judges, this was not possible. And then he goes through and he goes, I chose these. I put these on now so that you can see that I am putting on clothes, and these are the clothes that I wear in my performance. And
there's
through
an intention.
It's intention. So he goes, you're mistaken. And he is, in doing that, he's actualizing, making something actual, which probably then influenced all those people in 1991 who watched that, who went, whoa, this is cool. Because if there's anything that a young person gets excited about, or in another way, it's their duty to do, it's to question what came before. Is this the best possible reality? Is this the best actual thing? Like, everybody does that. That's what teenagers do. You rebel, and sometimes it's terrible, and sometimes it sets the new standard for going forward, or it makes this this domain of the possible into this is now actual. And from then on, you could just refer back to that. If in IJA juggling competitions, you could refer back to this moment of going, this is my costume. And now they would have to take that into account. They could still have a person who says, I refuse to take that on. It's bow tie or 0 points from me.
Yeah.
So that you will have that, but you continue to have it, and the more conservative it is, like in ballet or maybe not ballet, like let's say gymnastics or something, the limits to what you're allowed to do when you're doing your routine is restricted. So you could continue to push that out into another.
And what you said here is that like things like time and gravity is so fundamental, we don't think of them as restrictions. And that's been a big journey with juggling, which is that we have these traditions that are so entrenched that we didn't even think of them as traditions or habits or things that are forming the culture. And it was because things are so tangled up together and mixed together with so many different assumptions that you just take it as a truth.
But it's to me this really connects into what you talk about as juggling as art, what we have talked about in Reflex, that the history of juggling might be 3,000 years old, but history of juggling as art might only be 40 years old or so, from when Michael Motion really took it on. And what you're talking about is the evolution of the art of juggling. It's juggling as art, the history of juggling as art. Then somebody does need to question the costumes. And of course, this guy in 1991, he did what Francis Brun, when he took on the matador kind of the Spanish theme. So the flamenco. When he took that on, that was as an artistic choice, and for him just to put that on, and that it inspired the way that he moved, the way that he stood and gestured, the way that he presented the juggling and the music, and it put in a concept or a theme of the whole thing, which altered the way that you perceived the juggling.
Right.
So in a way, that this guy is doing, again, he's doing what Kurt Cobain did to music. He's doing the grunge of juggling, because he was influenced by Kurt Cobain. Like, you couldn't in 1991 not be aware of that, or maybe no. Hang on. They came out in 1991.
It's an aesthetic.
It's an aesthetic. So all of that was maybe 90. Maybe it was actually like 92. That
which I think is really the point, right? Is that the judges they only saw this like pop culture aesthetic or popular culture aesthetic.
It's just popular culture. It's just entertainment.
Exactly.
And we're going, no. It's a mode of expression that affords me a different style of juggling. If I put on the bow tie and I juggle like I'm about to juggle now, it will not be because I say truth is something that happens. It's not something that is. So the juggler is creating truth in that moment, and to be able to juggle like he did, he couldn't wear the bow tie and then juggle like he did, because then it would look weird. It would not spell truth. the experience would not be truthful to the audience. But when he does that, he takes the clothes and he puts them on, then truth happened in that moment, and a new generation of jugglers emerged from it.
So let's stick with that, because it's the last quote from the episode, and it's something that really sticks with me, something I've screamed about for years now, and now you have it here nicely articulated, and I would love to hear you again talk more personally about it. So the quote is from the episode: "It's all possible for me to make any kind of act, but as long as I just go around thinking I'm going to make the greatest act, well, what that's going to be is, I don't know. It's going to be the greatest thing," and so you don't really get much stuff done, and you have to make some restrictions. Well, it's going to have something to do with this magic move, or I spent a lot of time learning this skill, or whatever, and then that's a kind of a restriction. But it's also about making something that's possible to make it into an actual thing, which is what we've been talking about this past hour. But I really want to underline this idea that I've fallen into that trap too, probably even recently with our recent private conversations, Frodo, about my new show.
Oh, yeah, I see.
But this idea of like, everybody, walks around and says, I'm going to make a new act. What's it going to be? Well, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. It's going to be the greatest act. It's like, yeah, but what's that actually mean? And in some ways, it is the Michael Motion thing of, Michael Motion has his violin for 3D space, as he calls it. And it's his last kind of magnum opus, his last greatest work. And he's never released it. He hasn't done it yet. And I have this theory that, until he does that act in public and releases it or whatever, it's Schrodinger's cat. Is that the yeah. The cat is neither dead nor alive until you look in the box, right? Mm-hmm. So until Michael actually does this violin for 3D space in public, it is potentially the greatest thing he's ever done, right? And it's the same thing for all of us when we make that act, we make that new show. And in our mind, we're just like, man, this is going to be the greatest act I've ever done. Maybe not maybe you don't think it's the greatest act in the history of the world, but for you go, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. I'm going to make this great thing. I've never made something this good before. And until you actually go into rehearsal and until you actually start working, that thought is still very attractive, because you don't have any evidence to the contrary. You're still just in your head thinking about it. And anyway, so I really think that a lot of us get stuck into this little dilemma you just outlined right now. How do you think about that kind of stuff, or how do you get out of that trap?
Oh, well, I don't know. A lot of the time, what helps me is actual deadlines for actual gigs.
Right.
Because you work on something, and I work on what I'm going to say, and then sometimes after a while, then the introduction is full. I can't talk anymore now. I don't want to talk any more than 3 minutes, and that needs to get out of the last bit into the next bit, and have you laugh along the way and introduce the ideas that I will then start subverting as we go on. So then you can think of more and more ideas, but that means that you're also needing more and more time or whatever in between. So sometimes going out and doing an actual gig makes the possibilities necessarily actual. It concretizes it, and I go, hang on, there is no room anymore for any more gags there. I can change the introduction like that. I can do it like this. And you're going, yeah, but that's actually 6 different introductions. And now I need to do 6 different shows then to actually check which one seems to be the best one or whatever. But I just was thinking back to the last bit of the quote where I'm talking about restrictions. And I'm talking about restrictions because of criteria 4, which we talk about in this specific 109 episode, which is that there is always rules to play, because that makes it in. You might not have manifested them in your mind, but you're doing it. So I call those restrictions rules or restrictions, as we've sort of called it here. But I think that's the language that I use, and you use choices. Right. That's the same word. When you make a choice, totally. You have followed a rule. You don't know it. So I remember you've talked to me before about an exercise where you go, you're going to do You're going to do something juggling, and then you're going to go, do I like that or do I not like it? If you like it, you keep doing it. And then the rule is, why have I got this routine? It's because I liked it. That's the rule. So it can be as simple as that, but it's just an example of how you have a very, very well developed system of thinking because you've articulated it for students for 25 years. And I have a elaborate way of thinking as well. And they arrive at very similar kinds of truths.
Right.
The language is different. So you call it choices and I call it restrictions. And I do that because of the influences that I cite or whatever. But choice is a more practical and that's more to do with doing and making.
It's actionable.
Like. It's actionable, really. Like you take the choice and you do it. And I thought then of the greatest act in the world, which exists in the mind of Michael Motion, when he does solo violin for 3D space. That is still, and I've gone back to my thought that an act is like a living organism, or to go with a metaphor, an act is a kind of organism. And that act is still gestating. He is still pregnant with this act. And as long as he rehearses, it happened, and maybe someone has seen it or whatever, but it's still the pregnancy. Until you go onto stage and do it there, the act has not been born. And what I know as well is this, what we're talking about, how time is introduced into this, is that each time when you do that act, I see it as the act, as an organism, the premiere is the birth. And then each act that we do, the act is growing up and it's becoming resilient and it's learning to adapt. It's learning who it is and it's learning which parts of itself it will hold on to forever. And it'll be the core identity of that act, and which bits will fall away because it will shape itself in its interaction and relationship with the audience and with you. So that act is the greatest thing that you ever saw. But each manifestation of it will be its aging and its coming into being and its maturation as an organism.
I have one final question for you related to that and what we were just in the transition into getting into that. I'm really curious to know what your opinion on this is, or how you would deal with this. So what you're saying there, again, it's like the act is being born. It's in a gestation period. Before that, it's being born and all these things. So for me, for all my talk about not keeping things cerebral, but like thinking about things is like maybe more than we normally do, that we can always have a little bit more intention with our thoughts than just kind of like we need 20 elephants or whatever. And then we're kind of stuck with that reality. But like, what does that mean? And why do we want to have them? And can we get something else that's smaller, or what? I don't know, whatever, less heavy.
Is it even possible to go with 19, or is that just totally ridiculous?
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm always encouraging, for example, my students to put more thought into their thought, right? That to not just leave it as the first level encounter of that idea, but to kind of, again, scale it up or down or blah, blah, blah. Anyway, for all my talk of that, I also find myself preaching this idea to get it on its feet as soon as possible. So if somebody came to me abstractly and just said, hey, so I'm thinking about making this act, it goes like this, what do you think I should do? The first thing I would say is, well, do that first version you just told me about. Even if it doesn't exist, just go into a studio and do as much of it as you can, which is maybe nothing. Maybe it's just 1 second long, or it's a gesture, you scratch your nose or whatever it is that you're thinking about. I always encourage people to, make it physical as fast as possible within reason, right? Again, we don't maybe have the set design done or all the different elements of the costume or even the music or the lights or whatever, but do what you can and you'll start to grow and build from there. And I think that there is that tension then between that kind of process of just like, you get an idea, right? And you say, oh, maybe I have a hat and a cane and I put the cane on my chin and I throw the hat on the cane. And then I could move like this and blah, blah, blah. And then you can't even do that trick, but I still would encourage you maybe to stand up in your studio and pretend to throw the hat on the stick and kind of imagine
you
yourself.
learn something in the act of doing. It's another
fake
form
it
of thinking.
Fake it until you make it kind of thing, right?
Yeah, but also it's actually, you are actually realizing that idea to some extent. You go, oh, okay, whoa, yeah. You learn, yeah, okay.
Well, no, because it also comes back to that tension. Then I think of a lot of people, including myself, on this newest conversation I've been having with you about my new show, where it's like, why didn't I take my own advice and just shut up?
Yeah.
And just go to the studio and just start hashing out the material with what I have, because I have a starting point. And I realized that, like, first of all, it's not the most sexy advice, which is like, hey, go to your studio and do something that's not going to work, right? That's also already like kind of not a very fun proposition, perhaps. But the other part of it is that, like, in your mind, you want the work to be great, and you're maybe imagining it to be something that's possible, that could be more or better, but you already know before you start that it's not going to be that. And so I think there's a little bit of, it's a weird tension there between those two things, about this impulse, this desire to make the work at a certain level, and the reality of already knowing that it's not going to be that level. How do you navigate that process then of kind of the enthusiasm for that process? Or, I don't know, do you have some advice of how to
I can just say
believe or trust that that's going to all work out in the end? I don't know. I find it exhausting.
I gave you this. I talked about this the other day. In 2009, I had become clear to me that I wanted to do magic, but I had only been doing circus and freak show stuff for decades. So I didn't know how my character, the tennis guy or whatever, would do magic. How do I do that and make it seem like it's something that this person would do? Because it's not everything that you can grab on and just start to do. Not every character in the show can grab up and just read a soliloquy from Shakespeare and have the audience weeping. So I was doing magic. I went and bought some magic equipment and had some ideas for what I was going to do, and I did it. And I was almost embarrassed with what I was doing. I wasn't showing it to anyone because it was terrible. Because I was looking for the way to actualize these ideas, and my character couldn't. I couldn't deliver it truthfully. So because I kept feeling dejected, but I'd spent the money and taken the decision, and I wanted to do magic, something which I now is a core part of what I do again. But I wrote on a piece of paper and stuck it on the inside of the suitcase that I was having my magic in, that the act gets better.
Right.
And to keep that in mind, that it's like, if this was easy, then it's like, if this was easy and it just was like super, like just, then I wouldn't be breaking into something new for me. But to get to this new thing, I needed to fight with the material for a long time, and I did. And I can't remember where that must have been 2 years later, 2011. Some of those original ideas that I had that felt terrible and ridiculous.
Yeah.
I then did it with a live pianist when I was doing for Ali McGregor, did a sort of cabaret show as part of the Adelaide Cabaret Festival, the late night open stage. But there was a couple of people, me and Asher Trelevan, and were hired by her to be the core of that production or so. And there was other stuff happening. So I was doing different material every night. And then I thought, I can do this magic thing. I'll just see. And the way that I did that act that night, when I did ridiculous stuff with the foam bird and all of that, it changed the tempo and made me, for the first time. So it took 2 years from I had something completely new until I actually did it. And I went, this is the way forward. It had been that same trick all the way along, and it was so many things, but combining it with live music altered the way that I did the stuff, because I was now in direct relationship with somebody. So when I later on went and put that to music, I knew how to behave with the music. it taught me something new, and it came kind of out of necessity, and it got actualized with me in front of an audience, them having seen me on the night before doing the tennis and the sword swallowing and whatever other things that I'd done beforehand, so that when they saw me on the last night and I did that semi-improvised, it felt alive and electric and whatever. So the act did get better. And even then, looking at the video of that from 2011, it was not particularly awesome. But it kept, from then on, that was like the birthing moment or so. And it's to keep in mind that if you're in this for the long time, we're thinking about sustainability, and that genius is to be able to continue on into the future with doing this one thing, then you need to have this fundamental belief that whatever it is that you do will get better, because you will not cease from the exploration. And when you get back to the act again, it will be like you experience it for the first time.
Wow, man, that's perfect. Well,
that was
that
poem. That was the poem.
I mean, that really, honestly, that really helps me. The act will get better. Trust the process. Have faith that you're going to evolve. And wow, thanks so much for that. I really needed that. I appreciate it, man.
Good stuff.
Well, that's episode, what was
109.
that? 109.
All right.
All right, coming up.
Next one.
Yeah, 110. I think we're going to combine it with 111, and I look forward to both those chats coming up next.
Me too.
Thanks, man.
Have a good one.
Yeah, see you, man.
I always have so much fun catching up with my friend Jay Gilligan, getting into the meat of things. And I do post a bunch of stuff on Instagram, and if you wanted to follow The Way of the Showman on Instagram, then you'd see updates on what's coming and a few little extra insights here and there. Good to gather the community somewhere. And that is all that I have to say for today. So until next time, take care of yourself, those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.